Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force, and welcome to any members of the public who might be joining us remotely. Apologies for the late start. Before we get started, I just want to let anybody who's listening know that we will be taking public comment at a designated time. That's going to be at 12 o'clock today. And as usual, if you're not able to be present at that time, you can always submit comments to the task force in writing through our online form available at our website. That's myfwc.com/HAB task force. Before we get started, well, due to schedule conflicts, this is going to be an atypical meeting. It's going to be shorter than usual. It's just scheduled for 2 hours. And we wanted to make sure that we got together to touch base without too much time going by. And it also will give us an opportunity to provide some updates to you all on some ongoing initiatives. But before we get started, you may notice our FWI Director, Gil McCrae, is present with us, and he has a few announcements to make relative to task force membership.
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. First of all, I just want to reiterate our thanks and appreciation for your continued support on the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force. It's important work, and it continues to receive attention and appreciation at the highest policy levels of state government. In fact, the legislature and Governor DeSantis, in the budget that just began July 1st, have provided hundreds of millions of dollars for water quality improvement and have explicitly recognized the missions of the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force and the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, providing continued and/or enhanced funding support across the board. So really that recognition and that budget influx is a recognition of your commitment, the expertise that you bring to this group, and again, we very much appreciate your time and expertise. Just a couple of task force membership announcements. Many of you know that Jill Flieger has left Florida. She's moved to Virginia and is no longer with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. We're happy to welcome Culpepper to the task force as her replacement. For those of you that don't know Charlie, he is the Assistant Director of the FDAC's Division of Aquaculture, where he oversees the permitting and regulation of all certified commercial aquaculture facilities in state waters, shellfish harvesting areas, and shellfish processing facilities in Florida. So welcome to Charlie. It's good to have you on board and to continue to have the important representation of FDACs on the task force. And then one other note, many of you know that Leanne Flewelling is now serving as the Deputy Director for our Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. That role will result in her transitioning off the HAB task force. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Kate Hubbard, who will ultimately replace her as FWC's representative on the task force, and many of you know Kate. Kate heads up our Center for Red Tide Research, and they will be transitioning over the next meeting or two, and ultimately it's my intent that FWC will continue to chair the task force and Kate will transition into that role. So those are the two membership notes, and with that I'd be happy to pause there and take any questions that anyone might have.
Don? You're muted.
Anyone? Yeah, this is Gil.
Okay.
I didn't hear the question. I apologize. My audio went out for a bit. Would you mind repeating?
Well, this is Don. If you're talking about my question, that's what it was. My audio went off right when you started talking about membership. So now I'm dialed in on my phone. But can you repeat, at least for me, what you said? I heard what you said about funding and such, but then you said you had some comments about membership. And then I lost
Sure. Yeah, sure. Hopefully everyone else heard me, but in case you didn't, Jill Flieger has left Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. She's moved north. And Charlie Culpepper, who is the Assistant Director of the FDACS Division of Aquaculture, is the new FDACS representative on the HAB task force. And I also, Don, made a point to emphasize that Leanne's new role as Deputy Director of the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute will result in her transitioning off the task force, and we will leave the FWC representation in the very capable hands of Kate Hubbard, and Leanne and Kate will transition over the next couple of meetings, and ultimately Kate will take on the role of task force chair. Did that come through?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anybody have any additional questions for Gil while we have him? On anything?
This is Dwayne. Just congratulations, Leanne and Kate.
Thanks, Dwayne. I'll be lurking in the background, I'll still be around, don't worry. Okay, thank you, Gil. Before we review the agenda, I think it would probably be a good idea to take a quick roll call, just for the record, but also as a sound check for everybody. So please, as I call your name, respond. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Don. I think we still have you. Don Anderson?
Yeah, I'm here.
Charlie Culpepper?
Present.
Rick Clark?
Here.
Wade Dorch? Wade, can you hear us? Oh. Dwayne, we'll come back to Clay.
I'm here.
Dwayne DeFries, Kate Hubbard. Kate,
here.
Welcome to the task force. Chuck Jacoby.
I'm here.
Barb Kirkpatrick.
Good morning, I'm here.
Sherry Larkin.
I'm here.
Andy Rice.
I'm here.
Dave Whiting.
I am here.
And Rhonda Watkins. I don't hear you. Okay, Quay's having audio issues.
Oh, somebody turned me back on. Hello? You hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay. It just came on and said my mic has been turned back on. I think Megan muted me on purpose. I'm kidding, Megan. Congratulations, Leanne. Welcome, Kate and Charlie. Not sure how red tide season is going to roll out and not being able to talk to Kate. How's that going to work? We don't we
what
communicate
do you mean
with
not being able to talk to Kate?
Huh?
Well, we can talk to her. We just can't talk to her about task force issues.
Hey.
Yeah. Oh, I know, Charlie. We should. I'll send you the sunshine. Yeah. No task force discussion, business, except at these meetings. So, Quay, are you not going to be able?
Finally, I'm here.
Okay.
I couldn't find the mute.
Oh my goodness. All right. So everybody's here. a big group today. It is going to be a quick call, though. So we have a short agenda. We're going to have some roundtable updates. We do have time set aside at noon for public comment if there's anybody who wants to call in and address the task force. And the rest of the meeting will be just for a quick discussion of our future goals and meeting topics. Is there anything specific anybody wishes to add to the agenda? Oh, okay.
Leanne, it was just I was trying to send you a message earlier. I have to leave the video part of the call at a little before 12:30, but I'll stay on audio, and I'll be still on the meeting, but on audio only.
Okay. Okay, good to know. Thank you for letting us know. All right. So hearing nothing, let's go forward. So you're probably all aware, but just a quick update. We did issue a call for proposals through the HAB grant program. That call closed last week and we specified 3 areas that are priorities that we highlighted in our second consensus document. So the areas that we solicited proposals for were economics, socioeconomics, improve the ability to evaluate the severity of Karenia brevis blooms in the broad socioeconomic impacts for consistent comparable measurements across years. The second topic was to develop ecological models that predict the initiation, progress, or termination of Karenia brevis blooms and their impacts. So more models, better models, enhanced models. And as we did the first time too, we included improved early detection of Karenia brevis and brevetoxins to enhance rapid response. We structured things a little bit differently, recognizing our limitations to get agreements in place. So we have received proposals now. The project won't start until January, so that gives us a realistic buffer to get the agreements in place. And we set them up to be 18 months long, so a little bit longer too. So right now, I think many of you are serving as reviewers. Submissions are in review. I believe we got submissions for all 3 topics. Any questions about that? Barb?
Just how many total did we receive?
Not a large number. I want to say 7. So.
I'm surprised because it was posted for how many months? I mean, probably 3?
Not quite. I think maybe
okay.
Closer to a month and a half or 2, but they are pretty specific topics.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Well, hopefully they're just really quality proposals.
We'll hope so. Any other questions on that? Okay. Let's see. So we have a list of topics to update you on. The first one, aside from that, has to do with the Red Tide Response Tabletop exercises. Megan Abbott is going to join us and provide an update on that.
This is Leanne. So as you know, when you make your recommendations behind the scenes, we work our hardest to try and address them, particularly through the initiatives out of FW, CFWRI, and the Center for Red Tide Research. So in the past 2 consensus documents, a priority was identified to review the current practices and develop comprehensive statewide response plans for HABs in Florida. To address that, to begin addressing it, we started an interagency planning committee of state agency representatives. Some of those are on the call now. And the focus of that committee was to develop tabletop exercises that would test and map our current responses and what the framework looks like and the resources we're using from the state to local level. That's quite a broad capture, so we identified our first step for that was to just look at red tide at the state level response. with the intent of building that out for future exercises to address eventually all HABs in regions from county to local level. So we, leading the effort is Michael Mitchell from DOH. He is now the head of the public health toxicology section, but his background is in environmental health preparedness and emergency response. So he's been a really great leader for that, and using a model similar to an incident command system model, we looked at various scenarios for red tide related. We drafted them, and we extended that out to include members of each agency to review those scenarios and draft some text and tools that we might want to use for mapping those responses. And then we held tabletop exercises just a week ago with the actual staff at the different agencies that would respond to events, and we tested a number of scenarios from early detection from satellite to notification of health issues or animal, marine animal health issues, and had every agency identify the tools that they might use for that, the individual, not the person, but the actual responder in terms of their position, how they would, who they would contact for that, and who would be the responder, and how each would use the different tools in their agency or resources that were available. And taking all that into consideration, we'll now be drafting mapping those tools and those people to see what response looks like there, and then building out to take it, the stopping point for each agency was if they get to a contact at a county level or a local level, it became a stopping point. So the next exercises will bring in partner organizations and more local and county government to then build out what the response looks like at the next level down, and then we'll test it with other HABs beyond red tide. So the ultimate product should be a tool, a resource guide that anyone stepping into a role, whether they're completely new to the position, should be able to look and have a clear idea of who to contact for each different scenario, depending on if it's a health or animal or simply a public communication issue, and have a really fluid, comprehensive guide to response. Did people have questions? Or additions for those of you that participated? Anything
I'll chime in. I really appreciated the exercise. It really was a benefit to all that participated, I think, to hear how internal decisions and stuff were made, then making contacts to other agencies and how the network worked. So I think it was a very beneficial process, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Megan, I thought you alluded to it, but is this response thing going to be integrated with a communications plan, or is there a communication component to it?
There is a communication component to it. So as the participants in the exercise weren't just the scientific staff and field staff that might go sample or analyze items, it also included communications teams to determine at what point there might be press releases or there might be some kind of public notification on things. So it's part of the map of it. As I said, I think the key identification in that was the position or the office that would be contacted rather than the individual, since a lot of this is historic information or institutional knowledge rather than something that can be used by anyone. So it does include that. It includes the levels of sampling response from lab to field as well as communications.
Thank you. Any other questions for Megan? Dare I ask, time frame or next steps in your kind of projected time frame?
I think we'll have it all done within the fiscal year. I would hate to go sooner than that. the idea of this model, now that we have this framework built out from the state level example in one, it's very easy, according to Michael, to just build from that for the other scenarios. The biggest challenge is planning the tabletops with so many people and getting that scheduling done. So this first tabletop should be mapped within the next 2 months in terms of other HABs and the next levels of response. That will take some time, but I think we can address it throughout the fiscal year, and I think we could have it mapped by the end. I don't know how optimistic that is, but I think it's fairly realistic based on what we've accomplished so far.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Megan. HAB Communications Working Group. I guess, Charlotte, that falls to you, and also begs the question of, are you going to have a co-chair now that Jill's gone? But do you have updates to share for us on the communication work group?
Sure. Yes, there'll be a co-chair. Rhonda's going to step into that role. Thank you, Rhonda. And we have added some other membership changes as we came around. People moved off and so forth. But we have 12 members, so we're doing pretty good. The things we've been working on, there's been some effort with DOH on signage, trying to get some of the recommendations from the UF information into the signs, and that's carrying on. We're working with Kelly Richmond on a social media plan, which we'll take up again when we meet later this month. The rack cards should be pretty much in their final form, I think, so they're around. There is going to be, we're working on a video, which will be Red Tide Basics, I guess I'd call it, an animated video, which Megan just got back. So, again, that should be something that we'll have ready to do, and we'll need to promulgate that. I'm working hard on trying to figure out how multilingual things have to be. So try to come up with all the languages that we would need to translate things into. And then people should be looking at different websites, trying to come up with a way to have some sort of repository for products that everyone can get at, a little bit more centralized than the way things are at the moment, even if it's just pointers to them. So that pretty much wraps it up.
Yeah, that's a busy and productive work group. Thank you for the update. Does anybody have any questions for Charles? Chuck? We got two Charles, a Charlie, a Chuck. Get used to that.
I used to go by Chuck to confuse things further.
Oh, not anymore. No.
Charlie.
Thank you. Okay, and any questions for Chuck? No? Okay. Rick, I'm not sure if you got the tap or not. This is kind of a... Did somebody reach out and ask you if you would provide an update on, of course. The Department of Health, HAB Health Group, that would be great.
Sure. I'm going to try to control my excitement with this because we've been working on this a while. We've been in communication with the task force about transferring the Health HAB working group that we developed in-house at DOH to be a part of the task force and to use the task force's expanded, more extensive reach for other individuals that could participate in this working group. So we started out, a little bit of background on this, is we started out with our original funding that we were given from the legislature to do health research as it's associated with harmful algal bloom exposure and a long-term exposure to HABs. And we immediately went out and reached out to university partners and got some research started. And then we got to thinking about it, that as certain research closes and new opportunities come up, we need to have a committee or group put together of scientists that can help guide us with establishing and developing research projects, contracts, and, for a variety of things beyond what DOH could fund ourselves. So we reached out to the task force recently, and we came up with the idea of transferring this working group activity to the task force as a sort of a subcommittee or working group under the task force umbrella. And we're super excited about that because it allows DOH to get a broader level of information to guide us and to other research opportunities that the task force themselves might have to fund as well. So the purpose of the working group is addressing issues as identified in the Florida HAB task force document that DOH has been given tasks associated with health research and those activities, and this gives us an opportunity to use the task force to help us with that mission. So we went through several things. We're working on a charter back and forth now. We have it in our house to clean up the charter and get it back to the task force that would line out how the membership would look and what activities we would expect and how often the meetings would occur. So all that's in the development stages. But I really liked, and I would like to read out something that was developed by, I think, Kate and the others and Megan with the charter is the idea statement in the charter that came out. It was to improve, direct, educate, and advise both the task force and us as far as research is concerned. So as far as improvement, participate in the identification of challenges and potential improvements to protocol, research, surveillance, data source, reporting, and outreach methods for HAB-related health concerns. The direct portion is provide direction that informs strategies, activities, milestones identified and updated annually in the Bureau of Environmental Health's work plan. Thirdly is to educate, by assisting with the identification and planning of trainings for veterinary, medical professionals, and the public to advance education and knowledge on the risk reporting and clinical manifestations of HAB toxin exposures, and to advise by providing input on project scopes of work, project prioritization, and project deliverables to help ensure successful project outcomes. And I thought that was a really good summary of what we're out to accomplish with this group under the task force. So hopefully, feel free to answer. I can try to answer any questions you might have. We are coming to the task force with 4 current members, and those members are Dr. Wendy Steffen with the Poison Information Center, Dr. Matthew Gribble, who is with the Department of Epidemiology at the University of Alabama School of Public Health at Birmingham. Dr. Lori Baker is a participant with CDC, and Elizabeth Hamlin with CDC as well is coming prepackaged as members from us to the group, and we plan on expanding that membership once it's established.
And we'll hear more about this as it progresses, probably at a much more in-depth kind of overview or discussion at our November meeting, which is focused around health. But just to be clear, the work group, while it will now be, somewhat encompassed like as a resource for the task force and for DOH, it will be chaired by the Department of Health. Rick will be the chair, I believe. And, it still is very much so an entity like to advise the Department of Health and kind of run by them. It's just we're gonna get a lot more cross-pollination. I think it will be a good thing because we've kind of had this issue of how do we move forward on health initiatives when DOH, has its own responsibilities, but now kind of working together to kind of discuss about what the priorities might be and where we can plug in areas where they're not able to, given the stipulations of the funding they have. So I really look forward to being able to make progress in that particular area. Any questions for Rick on this now?
No, I think this is a great move. For sure.
Yeah. I'm excited too. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, guys. I think it's a great thing. I was wondering if there's any kind of giving information how the two funding sources will interact. Or is this going to be funded through the DOH funding, or is this going to be done through, the HAB task force and FWC?
Funding for the research outcomes or the projects that might come from the task force? Is that what you're asking for?
All of it. All of it. I mean, one is, this facilitating the working group itself, and two, how is the funding for the research projects that goes to DOH? How is that going to be handled with respect to also the funding from FWC, and how those decisions going to go forward?
Yeah, those are all really good questions, and that's all part of the development phase that we're discussing now. But our initial concerns is that we've both been in discussions on how we would pay for the facilitation aspect, and we both agreed that we could both probably try to contribute to that. As far as the funding goes for the research, our funding must come from long-term health effect projects, so they have to be tied to long-term projects. But any other project that may come to us that we feel is a need that the Health HAB working group can identify, perhaps the task force themselves could come up with a funding opportunity for that, or help those projects get funding elsewhere. That's our hope.
Right. Much like the task force recommendations, I mean, we don't have the funding to directly fulfill, all the research and work that needs to be done to address our recommendations, but we can do some, and we can provide the priorities for other potential sources of funding. And so having this sort of consensus of what is needed in this very important arena, for the state of Florida and the issues that we face, that could put weight behind somebody's proposal at another entity, for another entity's call. And it will certainly help DOH decide where to put their funding. And like Rick said, and we can, things that maybe don't meet the letter of their intent, we could maybe pick up with ours. So it's more of a resource not for one specific funding train, but potentially for several. Yeah, definitely more to come on this, but we just wanted to let everybody know what was in the works. Anybody else have a question on that? No? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Kate now. She's got some updates on a couple topics, the Florida HAB Observing Network and the Center for Red Tide Research. And I just want to, Kate, no rush, but come noon we will take a hard stop just to see if there's any public comment.
Okay. So I'm just going to pull up my slides. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, good. I can't see you guys anymore. So thank you. I am going to start with an overview of the Florida HAB Observing Network workshop. So Florida HAB-on is what we're calling the Observing Network as it's sort of becoming more formalized. And just to kind of get everyone on the same page, the Florida HAB-on workshop steering committee, which I will show in just a second, was established as a first step towards addressing two recommendations that came out of the task force. One was that FWC should work with the IUS regional associations to help develop and ideally sustain a integrated observing system that includes a lot of different sensors to help measure cells, toxins, as well as environmental conditions. The second point was that FWC, with existing and new partners, should identify projects that address multiple stakeholder needs. And these include things like developing a suite of models to better predict short-term and long-term bloom dynamics, health impacts such as onshore inland transport of brevetoxins in air, the role of nutrient inputs, climate change, and exacerbating blooms and their impacts. And so there's a number of other recommendations that this touches on as well, but these were two key ones that really helped stimulate the Observing Network workshop. I just wanted to introduce the steering committee. I think that I have mentioned who was on the steering committee previously, but we have some of the members that are on the task force as well as some others. And so it's been great to work with these folks for the better part of a year putting together the workshop. So the workshop, I should say, happened May 23rd through 25th. We had these sort of goals at a glance where we had some pre-meeting activities in the form of recorded plenaries. We also had plenaries during the actual workshop. The folks that gave plenary presentations were Barb and Gary Kirkpatrick. They gave separate presentations. Clarissa Anderson from California, Coy Dortch, Betty Stogler, and myself. We also broke out into 5 different working groups and had breakout sessions to focus on a number of different key topics that the steering committee recognized as being really critical to moving this effort forward. And then we attempted to synthesize the different priorities and rank those as a group during the final day of the meeting. We are now in the post-workshop phase, and we're working on a few key products from that. One, not surprisingly, is the proceedings from the workshop. We're also trying to build together a paper that looks into the future and helps create this sort of blueprint, and we're also continuing to develop and implement the Florida HAB-on. So this was the workshop at a glance. This was the actual agenda overview, and these were the 5 different topics that we focused on: health risks, including both wildlife and humans, in situ and remote sensing measurements, discrete measurements, HAB ecology, modeling, and forecasts. We had 5 facilitators, 1 for each group, and then we also involved junior scientists in a note-taking role, and that was really successful. We focused during the breakout sessions on 2 major questions, focused on this objective of providing the blueprint for an enhanced network. The 2 questions, the first was really focused on trying to think about what we have now and what can we do better with existing resources. The second was to identify priorities looking ahead 3 and 10 years to try to, again, build this blueprint and try to figure out the best way to get to where we want to go and build additional connections in terms of our research, monitoring, management, and communications. So these were the 2 questions that we focused on with each of the different topics. And we had our participants, we had them pre-assigned to these different working groups, and we tried to diversify expertise so that we didn't end up with having all of the HAB ecologists or all of the remote sensing experts in the same group. And we also had a steering committee member or more in each of the groups. We had approximately around 60 RSVPs, and we had probably close to 2/3 of that in terms of the participants throughout the entire workshop. And Megan, please correct my stats if I'm off on that. Okay. So I did want to skip to, I'm going to break out of this, and I just wanted to go over the results briefly. And so we did have ranking for each of the 5 topics, and this is actually, I apologize, not for group 1, this is across all of the different groups. So we ranked all of the topics on the final day from within each group, and then we put the top choices into a final ranking, and then we ranked those across all the topics as one group. And with that, we came up with some core different recommendations for what we can do now and also what we can do in the future. So this was focused on some of the things we can do now. I'm going to come back to this first one in just a minute, but these included things like creating dashboards, trying to identify and address key hypotheses that consider the data that's already out there, develop stronger coordination across different agencies, and this includes, the full gamut of people that are likely to be working on these events, and also to design modeling products and concepts that are meaningful to end users, improve networks between wildlife health rehab groups and the medical community. So this really touches on a lot of the different components that would be essential to the observing network. One of the things that came up multiple times was creating a searchable data assembly center or portal or repository. And so that was a theme that came up in all 5 of the working groups. And so when we ranked all of these top priorities, including the 5 that pointed to a data assembly center, we have those 5 intertwined. And so this is how they ended up working out. When we compiled all of those that mentioned the data portal into one, that was the clear winner, with designing, modeling products and concepts that are meaningful to end users as the second. So again, just something to consider, in terms of thinking about what we might do moving forward, and again, some of the things that we can do sooner rather than later. With the second question, this was focused more on looking ahead into the future, and there are some key things that came out of that, including things like research on aerosolized toxins, development of additional real-time detection methods for toxin testing, other parameters, data on current sampling programs to help, again, try to get all of the data information more or less in one place, and some other things too. The last one speaks to a lot of the different research needs, and this is something that took a lot of different directions, and I think could go in any number of different places, but some of those that were really recognized as being important are thinking about the role of the ecosystem, both in terms of how it's impacted, how it responds to these blooms, how it recovers from these blooms, but also the role that has in terms of promoting these blooms. And so lots of interesting things came out of this. And when we did the voting, again, there were a number of different things that went into the voting, but the top pick for what we should be focusing on 3 to 10 years into the future was sampling the well-designed grid over a long period of time to address issues such as bloom initiation, role of terrestrial nutrients, factors leading to super blooms, hypoxia. So I think these are really in line with some of the task force recommendations, and so it's really great to see that there is a lot of overlap, and I'll discuss that a little bit when I give the Center for Red Tide Research update, which is coming next. I did just want to touch upon data management, which was highly ranked in this part as well. And we did have a survey that happened post-workshop that our participants took. We had a really good return rate in terms of getting responses back. And we are in the process of, considering that how to best work forward with that critical review. And one of the things that came out of the survey was the question as to whether or not, we were going to go down the list and say, okay, let's get this first thing in place and start to work on that. And that's not necessarily the intent. Again, this is intended to help provide a blueprint. And I think that there's a lot of things here that we've made progress on, that we can make progress on. And I do think that having critical review of these topics is an important next step before we go too much further. So again, these are things that we are working on in the background. I also just wanted to say data management, again, obviously recognized as a big topic, and we're actively thinking about how to respond to these in terms of potentially working with some other agencies, other groups to help have co-hosted seminar series or webinar series. Again, trying to continue to address some of the things that came out of the workshop in terms of moving forward and addressing some of the gaps that were identified. And so I'm gonna stop sharing that right there and see if there are any questions about the workshop, and then maybe I can give the Center for a Tide Research update after the public comment period.
Any questions for Kate? If I missed it, I apologize, but what's the time frame for, the initial product of the workshop?
Yeah, we're trying to get the proceedings out probably within the next few months. We've started to put together an outline, but some of the things that are taking a little bit more time, there's a lot of information that came out of the meeting. We had recordings, and then we had a chat function, we had the note takers, and we had the facilitators. And so trying to collate all of that for all of the different working topics is an ongoing component. And then we have a number of people that are interested in helping with the proceedings. So it's, once we have that collated, I think that's going to be the hard part, is, trying to come up with the overview of what was discussed, and then there are a lot of things, trying to figure out how to highlight and not exclude things, not give something too much weight relative to other things. So I think within the next few months, and we're also working on a website, and so that will be a place where we'll have links to the plenaries, which were recorded, and we also will have information like the proceedings, but some of the other things. And we're thinking about, again, future events that will be relevant, and, how to solicit membership, that sort of thing. It's very much a voluntary process, but for this workshop, we focused on a specific audience, and, moving forward, we want to make sure that we expand that.
I thought those plenaries came out really well. I was impressed with them all. I like the way they were done, and the great work you guys all did. Barb, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I just want to iterate that we still need to focus on creating a HAB observing network for Florida. And I think a lot of the topics that were addressed in the workshop are needs, but they weren't actually directly addressing creating an observing network for Florida. And I think we kind of need to keep our eyes on the prize, so to speak.
Well, it is noon, so we will take a pause right now in the meeting to see if there are any members of the public who would like to call in and share anything with the task force. There are instructions on the screen on how to join the phone queue. the next meeting will be in person. We'll talk more about that in a little bit before we leave, but that'll be a nice change. Megan, any idea if we have any callers?
Patricia, is anybody queued up?
Give it another minute or so.
No one in the queue at the moment. I think you could leave it on for 5 or 10 minutes and maybe come back to it. Let Kate do it and come back to it, if that works.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll leave it open. We'll let Kate do her final update, and then we'll see if there's anybody.
Okay, I'm going to share slides again. Thanks, Patricia. Okay. One thing that, just to kind of go back to the Florida HAB on for 1 second, one of the other efforts that's happening at a national level is the National HAB Observing Network is also in a phase of working through a number of different steps towards implementing a national observing network for HABs. So it's something that is going on kind of in parallel with the Florida network, and I think that we're all excited to see how those entities interact in the future. And one thing that I just wanted to mention is that Matt Garrett was recently appointed to the National HAB on Steering Committee, and so he coordinates our field program, but again, we're really excited to continue to develop what's happening in Florida with the national plan in mind. Okay, so the Center for Red Tide Research is the topic of my next little update. And so we, just to go back, the Center for Red Tide Research was established in response to the 2017 to 2019 bloom. And I'll show another slide, but it provides a backbone to enhance our existing partnerships and develop new ones. And the Center for Red Tide Research Fund supported the reactivation of the harmful algal bloom Red Tide Task Force and the coalescence of the Florida HAB on. So this is something, we have a number of the partners listed here. This is a slide that I took, but it helps just provide that sense of the umbrella and then the different components that fit under that umbrella. So I did want to just go a little bit more into detail. We have mentioned the HAB Task Force grant program, and that's something that has helped get a number of these different projects in place. And we've also had some other projects that have started based on needs that have been recognized by the task force. And just to give a sense of how this has looked over the past few years, this is a really quick overview, but we historically had been working a lot with MOAT in terms of our long-term research agreements. And with the Center for Red Tide Research, we've been able to fund approximately 16 projects since 2020. These are projects that are looking externally. We do have internal projects as well. And a number of these are with Florida universities, and we also have MOAT. We also have a few that end up as multi-year, multi-investigator contracts. And this just shows sort of the breakdown from 2021 to 21-22. Moving into 22-23, we have started to try to lay the groundwork for having longer-term agreements with some of our core university partners, in addition to USF and MOAT. So we are in the process, our fiscal year just started, so we're in the process of trying to get these up and going. And the summary recommendations that focus on public health, communications, management, and response and research, these are really what we're using, with the detail provided to help guide, the scopes of work and the overall trajectory that these projects and these efforts take. There is some effort and motivation to try to sustain some of the measurements that we're making, again, in support of the Florida HAB on. So this is a bit of a laundry list, and I apologize, but I did want to put all of the different titles in one place just to give a sense of some of the breadth of research that's going on. For example, University of Central Florida, a lot of our work with them has really been focused on advancing genetic detection capabilities. So looking to try to have a really excellent using digital droplet PCR methods to try to get low limits of detection for quantifying red tide. We've also been working with them to test a number of different sediment DNA extraction protocols. This is important as we think about bloom initiation and the potential for there being a resting stage in the sediment. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can provide this if helpful. And we're in the process of developing a Center for a Tide website as well. And that will be a great place to provide this type of information and a little bit more detail about the projects. So we've had several with University of Florida. Some of these have been funded, and this is one where measuring aerosolized brevetoxins. This is something that, pardon the spelling of brevetoxins there. This is something that has been happening with our partner at University of Florida, and it was funded initially through the HAB grant program and then was picked up by the Center for a Tide for second year of funding. So we have some other projects too, and these are some of our other partners. In terms of the 5-year agreements, these are the multi-collaborator, multi-investigator, interdisciplinary agreements, and they have multiple components that are broken out. And these are typically really trying to bolster core parts of our observation network that we think is critical. So things like offshore sampling, but also our glider and ocean tech programs that we have both with University of South Florida and Mote Marine Lab. So that's just kind of an overview. We're really excited to see what happens this next year. And I can go into a few examples of how we're using some of these projects and working with these collaborators to address linkages that go across some of the different recommendations. So I do have some examples, but I can also stop. I can't see faces, so Leanne, do you have a sense of whether we should pause or whether you want a couple examples?
Let's pause just for a second and find out if there's anybody in the queue.
There are no public callers, so you can close the line.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Kate, you can give some examples.
It'll be quick. So just to kind of give some examples, so we have our somewhat canonical sense of how blooms form in terms of the initiation with cells from offshore being transported onshore, and then nearshore processes helping to aggregate those cells, and cells ultimately also dividing, growing. So trying to focus on different components of the bloom cycle is something that is really important for the observing network. And just as an example, some of the new monitoring efforts that we've built in are these 3 different transect lines that go from nearshore to offshore. 2 of these are monthly, 1 is bi-monthly, and they each have additional components built into them that are specific to, again, trying to address key questions. We have offshore spat transect, vertical transect that is harvested monthly and processed for toxins in addition to seawater monitoring. With the Sarasota line, we have gliders that are deployed as part of that effort. And then we have sediment sampling that happens as part of our more southern effort. So this has been a great way to not only get offshore coverage, but build in additional analyses as needed. We also have some offshore surveys that we've been doing with NOAA AOML since 2018. And we fund additional ship time on these surveys, but we also fund some additional measurements such as trace metals, carbonate chemistry, and our IFCB analyses. So again, using these to try to continue to develop the observing network and also continue to make new measurements that are relevant to understanding red tide processes that we could better parameterize for models. This is a slide showing the glider operations that have been, the missions that have been put out by USF off of Tampa Bay. And this is showing kind of a multi-year perspective. In 2021, we had 183 wet days. This is a huge collaborative effort. IUS is definitely involved, thanks to Socorro and GCUS for all of their support. We also were able to integrate a SUNA nitrate sensor into those some of those glider deployments, and we're using that to get a better sense of what the nitrogen profiles look like offshore, and that's really important for understanding what nutrients are available to red tide out there, also what's going to be making its way onshore. We also had MOAT deploying off of Sarasota Bay. They had 65 wet days. So if you compare 2021 to other years, you can see that the coverage is getting better, and this is really important. Last year we had, I think everyone's aware, particularly bad bloom year, and so being able to have this type of data throughout the bloom event, and especially during the time when new blooms could potentially initiate, really helps us address some of those core questions. We're also focused a lot on trying to get a better handle on whether or not Karenia brevis and sediment plays an important role in bloom dynamics. And so we have a number of activities that we've been gearing up to try to help enhance that effort. We've had several coring cruises. We also have had some of our collaborative projects. I mentioned the ones with USF or UCF already and ECHRD, but we're also trying to build this into some of those efforts. And then we've been, there's some background noise. We've been working really hard on the developing our imaging flow cytobot program too. So this is something that so far we've had a number of different efforts since 2019 when we got our first IFCB. Overall, we've had 330 wet days on cruises, or excuse me, in situ deployments, over 100 days on cruises. We have our taxonomists meeting weekly with our IFCB scientists to classify taxa. So we have over 50 groups currently classified. We're also really interested in trying to get a better handle on physiology. So can we measure in situ growth rates, morphology? Can we use IFCBs to help do veracity testing of the forecasting tools, because we have high frequency data that really speaks to being able to look into that more. And so with some of the funding through the center, we have now procured these IFCBs. We're continuing to work with them in a number of different capacities. We also have 2 state-funded projects that were specifically involving the IFCB, one to try to identify morphology or morphological changes under nutrient stress, and then another to build this into routine monitoring off of Fort Myers down south. So that's all I had. Again, I just wanted to provide some examples. I think that a lot of the projects are really intertwined, and they do help, each one contributes to the greater whole, and we're always trying to develop those parallels and intersections where we can. And I would say that we're also really excited to see what the outcome of this year's HAB grant program will be. I think there's a chance with some of the different topics that were advertised, there's a chance to go in some different directions.
Kate, any questions for Kate? think that was a good, go for it, Barb.
This is Quay, and I know it's pretty early on. Are there any preliminary results from the sediment work? I am very curious about that.
So far, Quay, we are trying to get cells out in a number of different ways. So just looking at the bulk sediment and the preliminary tests that we've done, we have not found it, but we are working on concentration approaches so that we can pull out cysts and then work from that with using genetic methods or other methods that we've developed in-house.
Thanks. Just curious.
We did get signal for when we spiked cells into some sediment that we got from an area where Karenia doesn't bloom, and we were able to pick that up. So, we do have some positive controls in that regard, but still working through.
And then this is Barb. My question was, so does the Center for Red Tide Research have a technical advisory committee, or how is the decision-making process? How does that work?
Yeah, so sometimes there's a lot of different ways that these projects come to fruition. Some of them were started as collaborations through other funded projects, and then they've continued, especially for particular components that are important to our program. There was also through the grant program, there were a few, through the first call, there were a few projects that didn't really fit the call. They were well reviewed, and the response was, but they don't really fit the call. And we were able to fund a few of those through the Center for Red Tide Research. In terms of a technical advisory committee or board, we have internal reviews, and so each project has a project manager, and then each contract has a contract manager and a scientific advisor. But typically there is a group of 5 to 6 scientists within our HAB group that are working on each scope of work as it goes through a review process. In terms of an external board, we don't currently have something like that in place. But we do really rely on the task force recommendations, again, to get some of these different agreements and relationships in place.
Yeah, that has been a useful guiding document. So, any other questions for Kate? Oh, okay. Thanks, Kate. I think that's all we have for updates. And as you can see, there's a lot happening. So with the rest of the time we have, which is not a lot, we just wanted to talk about next project for us as a task force and in some of the future meetings. So I'm just going to start with, we had discussed, we can't keep continually revising our recommendations every single year. There's no point in that. We need time to get work done and see what happens. And so one of the things that, as a group, we thought might be useful, if you all recall, would be not white paper, something written at, the level for a non-scientist, but a document that sort of lays out the array of HABs that we have in Florida as a whole, and maybe sort of breaking it out regionally. Each part of the coast sort of has its own particular inventory of HABs that give them trouble. Even if Karenia gets most of the attention, we all know that that's not the only problem we have in Florida. So we were thinking about a document that reads at a non-scientist level, but provides sort of a comprehensive overview of the HAB issues we have in Florida. I don't want to go into it saying I don't want it to be more than 8 pages. It will be what it will be, but it's not going to be like the old white paper written by the older task force, which is super detailed, review document. This is going to be more to answer the questions, a legislator might have, or even a member of the public. This is where I live. Like, what are the problems that we face in this area? So I can kind of picture it sort of indexed regionally, but then by necessity, we would have to provide more information on these other types of HABs that we have in Florida. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we might structure it. Obviously, I'm leaning towards regionally, and then with a summary in each region about the HABs that are present, the different types of impacts they have on potentially public health, on wildlife health, fish and wildlife health, the history of that HAB in that area, that kind of thing. Thinking really broadly, we would also want to include blue-green algae, of course, and that might be more of a challenge to address regionally, and we might have to handle that in a different way. Kate has some good ideas about how we might handle that aspect. And and then I can see some, maybe boxes or specific sections that go into a little bit more detail on what pyridinium is or what pseudonychia is, or, let's talk about brown tide. So are we all still supportive with producing such a document? I mean, I can see the need because we've been so Karenia-centric. Not that we can take our foot off that gas pedal, but there's so much more out there, and I think, it behooves everybody to know the risks in their particular area. Especially when you think back, when the original task force was created, most of the HABs on my list right now, we're not on the list then. This is a changing scenario, and whatever we kind of describe today, could need updating in like 5 years. There might be a new player on the scene. Conditions might have changed in certain areas, but we wanted to get your thoughts on this. I do think it's a valuable thing to produce, and it would be useful for a lot of different groups. Our hopeful timeline would be to work on it this year, have it done by early next year, again, prior to any legislative session. So January or February. I see, us kind of at the Institute directing, like sort of spearheading it, making the outline, and enrolling strategic others to help with writing, and but the task force would help produce it to the extent that you can and you want to, but definitely do a review too. But like, now's the time for a good input on merit, and then thoughts on how it might be structured. I'm going to open up a floor.
Leanne, I'm trying to use the raise hand feature. I don't know if you can see it or not.
So am I.
I see no hand. Can you do that?
Okay. Well, so my thought is, one, the level of detail that you're describing, whether it's for the general public or for legislatures, and then noting that having that geographic component to it is so important if people are just wanting to know something about, what might be in an area or what's going on. Is a paper necessarily going to be the best format, or would a web-based tool with a mapping feature that you can click on a water body and then you can have information brought up about what blooms there, a short history of it, maybe a link to that particular species that describes in generic detail something about that. Is just my thought is about the format of it more so than the concept.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good idea. I wouldn't want someone to have to click into infinity to get to the specifics that they want. I mean, there's also there's an element of efficiency in getting the information. and having it just on a few pages, but I like where you're headed to, and maybe there's a way to do both. Quay, was your comment to do with Dave?
Well, I guess I wonder why, after we've done recommendations for Karenia, why this would not address recommendations for the other HAB species. Is it that you don't want resources to be diluted at this point, so that we just don't have the bandwidth or the money to address anything other than Karenia? But if that's not the case, why not do recommendations and look at what others are doing and look and then say, well, here's what needs to be done?
I think that when you think about the HAB issues that really need that type of attention and coming together of resources to address problems, I think that what you're looking at is the Indian River Lagoon. I mean, I'm kind of trying to think of where else there is that sort of urgency other than red tide, blue-green algae, which has the other task force, and the IRL, which a lot of people have already done that, and a lot of work is already being done, and a lot of recommendations have been made, and projects are ongoing. Not to say that the problem is solved, it's certainly not, but we've been kind of trying to figure out how we might help out there. When I'm thinking about some of the other HABs, I think the real need at this point is just kind of like awareness and fact-checking on what we have and what's what. They don't have the same types of impact as Renia. Dwayne, what were you going to say?
No, go ahead and finish, and then I'll jump in.
Oh, just yeah. I mean, we certainly could go down that path. That would be quite a pivot from where my head's at right now. But I'm open to hearing how everybody else feels about that and discussing that.
I have a sort of a reason for suggesting this. I don't know if you all are familiar with a recent legislation that has passed and just been signed by the president called the South Florida Clean Coastal Waters Act of 2021 to require the Interagency Task Force on Harmful Algal Blooms and Hypoxia to develop a plan for reducing, mitigating, and controlling harmful algal blooms and hypoxia in South Florida and for other purposes. And this is telling NOAA, actually, I mean, it's the IWG HABARCA, but that is primarily asking NOAA to put together a team to write this report. And as I understand, Florida DEQ has already been talking to people in NOAA about this, and actually complaining that the Florida HAB Task Force is not being very communicative about what they're doing. And so I think that going forward, we're going to have to somehow improve communications, but also the Florida HAB Task Force doing something, they may get something out. If NOAA does a set of recommendations, it's going to be one thing and perhaps not particularly appropriate. But Congress has told us to do it. And it would be better if the Florida HAB Task Force had a document to which this federal task force could refer to.
Well, in terms of Karenia and blue-green algae, I think those exist already.
Yeah, no, and certainly if they don't already know about them, I will point them out to them. They're just beginning to get organized to do this. Let's say that all the people in NOAA involved in this are not happy that this has been given to us to do because we don't feel that we should be doing it, but we've been told to do it.
Dwayne?
Yeah.
Just a couple points.
Oh.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
First, I totally support this. The story that hasn't been told, is that other story beyond Kyrenia. And I like the idea of looking at the geography of it, but I don't think we ought to be too narrow, because one of the things that I'm seeing, at least from my perspective, is kind of these very nuanced differences between Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, Indian River Lagoon being kind of a special, unique crisis and issue. And I think depending on who the audience is, having a statewide view of HABs beyond Kyrenia would be a very valuable document, for everybody, whether it's an elected official, the general public, because I don't think most people see it outside of their local area. So that's number one. I totally support it. And as most of you know, there's a lot of work already done in the Indian River Lagoon and a couple really great, synthesis reports. Ed Flips has a great one. We may need to integrate some of that, Southern Lagoon data. So totally supportive of moving forward. The Quay's comment, the South Florida Clean Coastal Waters, there's a number of congressional legislative amendments that are focusing on South Florida. And, my concern about, kind of using that as the driver is that the definition of South Florida as it gets implemented, the language of that amendment kind of includes the Indian River Lagoon and some of our West Coast estuaries, but isn't too definitive on how far north you go. And I, no question we need to be communicating better. I had EPA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been down. My mind, better communication from federal, state to local, including programs like mine, is important. But I think where our focus ought to be, at least initially, is going to be kind of a broad brush on what the rest of the state looks like. And then many of us do have some recommendations as it relates to harmful algal blooms. I know we do in the Indian River Lagoon, and they're all focused on nutrients and fixing the plumbing. It's very similar to the blue-green algae task force. A lot of that, is a generic umbrella over nutrient reduction strategies. Freshwater management strategies are an important part of that. And I think, gosh, we could tell a really good story, because a lot of people, forget to separate kind of what I would call the nutrient sources versus the nutrient conveyances. And at least for us in the lagoon, this crazy year-to-year shift in what we see blooming with a lot of novel species that, Kate and team are still trying to figure out what some of these nanocyanobacteria are. And there's a story there that I think needs to be told. Many of you probably know, but we're in a crisis situation now in the lagoon. Chuck's, been on top of this, but, 90% loss of, biomass of seagrasses, which has resulted in a manatee UME that's not going away. And my concern is the lack of understanding about the drivers for the HABs. We're starting to see a lot of want for some silver bullet solution that's not related to the really hard task of fixing the plumbing and the nutrient loads. And there's no question that's one of the drivers in the Indian River Lagoon, but not the only one. There's a whole suite of issues we don't really fully understand, including seasonal shifts, temperature, stochastic events. I mean, there's just a lot there that I think is as complicated as red tide, maybe not as devastating from a statewide standpoint, but it sure is devastating from an estuary to estuary standpoint. And when you put it all together, I think we should be responsible to start getting that information to the people who make decisions, including funding decisions. So that's my 2 cents on that. I'm all for it.
Thank you, Dwayne. Looking for other response to what Clay and what Dwayne has said.
I was just going to ask for a clarification from Quay, because I heard her say Florida DEQ, and we don't really have one of those. So was that DEP that she was referring to, Quay?
Yes, sorry. I misspoke. I deal with so many different agencies in so many different states, and they're all called slightly similar things.
Sure. Okay. I'm just not familiar with what you were referring to.
Does that legislation, as has been noted, like, what is South Florida? Does it define geographically what it is?
It defines it all as South Florida Water Management District and the coastal waters surrounding that. So I was going to bring it up, so thanks, Quay, for bringing it up, because I was wondering if anybody else.
And the Florida Reef Tract, it's everything.
Yeah, other thoughts there? I mean, it's Kate.
I had a question. Quay, is there a plan to, it sounds like there are some communication, challenges right now. Is there a plan from NOAA's perspective to try to work with folks in Florida that are working on HAB issues? Is that
absolutely?
Yeah. And is that an opportunity for the task force to become perhaps more formally involved through having a delegate or liaison as part of that?
I'm not quite sure how they're planning on doing it. They haven't had a meeting yet. Just trying to figure out who in NOAA is willing to work on this. And I have been pushing hard about all the people I know of that I think should be involved. So right now we're scheduled to hear from Mark Raines from Florida DEP. And I have urged that we need to hear from a much broader audience than that. And I think that it's not that anybody disagrees. And fortunately, the deadlines in this are long enough that we have time to come up with a plan to get a very broad input.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I think that'll be good to continue to think about how the task force can play a role in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I had a comment. This is going back a little bit in the conversation, but just thinking about the sort of written document format, I think that it would be great to maybe put that together and then use that to develop something that would be like an interpretive web-based version. So I like the idea of having both, but maybe doing the working document first and then turning that into a web overview. Yeah, an interactive web resource.
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea too, just so that it's more reachable and more changeable. And yeah. But
I would like to just support that idea as well, and ultimately maybe extending it to the blue-green algae information as well, just because most of my questions that I get are blue-green algae related, as far as historical, what can occur in my area, that kinds of things that may not be at the specific lake, that has had a bloom before, but that knowledge of what could occur in the area would be beneficial, along with the Carinea brevis and other species in the marine environment.
Mm.
Add one more thought, that from the communications work group and the Florida Sea Grant work, where they had noted, the public having difficulty with the content of some websites and all, that concept of a tiered sort of, you can consume it at whatever level you're comfortable with, and presenting it in a way that from a novice to an expert can consume it at a level that they're happy with is, might be something we want to build into this as well.
I like the web resource. I like both, with the idea of being able to put links so that it's very much an active document as well, where you can go and see results from recent sampling, that sort of thing. So,
yeah. More thoughts on this?
would this be something that we could scope out focusing on one region initially, or would we want to tackle the entire state?
We want to tackle the entire state, but in terms of setting a template or something, starting to work on it, maybe just starting with a region. Sure. But I don't want to spend a lot of effort just doing that for one region and then building it out as we have time. I'm not sure what the suggestion was there. Again, just, part of it is I think that there's not a lot of people understand what the issues are and what the potential impacts are. They are very different from red tide. Did you see, I shouldn't bring this up, but that article in the paper about, was it the one Carinea cell in the Indian River Lagoon and how that was going to kill everything there? And, it's when we have events in areas that get less attention, when we have red tide on the East Coast, when we have different types of blooms, where people aren't really sure what's happening, I think that there's not a lot of, good basic level information out there. And I wouldn't want to start throwing out recommendations for Sediment blooms. I don't think we need them. I don't know what they would be. It's not, people don't understand, what the information that we have on those types of blooms around Florida. And maybe that's our fault for not disseminating it easily enough or widely enough. But, not all HABs are the same. And, most people probably don't even know that we have a number of these other HABs. They know we have problems in the Indian River Lagoon. They know when there's sargassum building up on the beaches. They know when their scallop harvest has been shut off for the season because we have a Sediment bloom. That's when people know. So I think we have a lot of education to deal with. And I'm glad that Dave is reminding me that, we've paid people to tell us how to communicate better, and we need to learn from what they're telling us, people want and how to do things. And, this could be a lesson in that, one of our first tests. And Quay, I think if we can plug in on the federal effort at some level, I'm all for that, for being useful but I don't want to make taking care of that the focus of what we do from here on out, especially with so little information right now on how it's going to happen or what kind of help they want or what's going to be required. So I think that...
Well, I didn't want to suggest that, but I wonder when you say, for example, with the Pseudonychia, it's happened a number of years that there have been closures. Is it so predictable that you don't need any research on that?
No, I wouldn't say that, but we need research on it. And, you know, the closures, as you know, they've all been in like one system.
Yeah.
Kate, where's the current bloom that we've been monitoring with
Franklin County?
Where is it?
Franklin County.
Oh, okay. So Franklin County has had a super dense bloom. I don't think there have been any effects, have there? Fish kills or anything like that? And
no impacts.
No impact and zero toxicity. Like, it's one of those things that can get overblown. We do have issues in specific areas here, and we need to know more about why. I'm not.
So to me, that's the kind of recommendations I was thinking about, where there are areas that understanding it better would help you all manage it better.
Right. Well, maybe, you know, if we're going through these diverse HABs across Florida, like in addition to the information we're providing, you know, we could also highlight some like high-level needs like that. Yeah. So make some recommendations. Or
yeah, so that would give somebody ammunition
identify
for
gaps.
Going for an EcoHab grant, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe not formal recommendations, but identifying information gaps or I guess we'll have to see as we work through each scenario, like what would be appropriate. So.
And don't forget about Ciguatera as well. I mean, that's something, if you look at the surveillance systems, I mean, we have between 50 and 100 confirmed Ciguatera poisoning cases a year, and probably a lot more than a non-serious but have some effect. So just would put a plug in for that as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That would have to be included. Please.
And to Quay's point on recommendations, you know, we can't stop continuing to support monitoring and coastal observation. You know, that has become super apparent to me, you know, where we've got, data sets in some sections of the lagoon and maybe not others. These long-term data sets that are robust really are powerful, you know, when they get, 10, 20 years out and looking back at, periodicity and storm impacts and seasonal changes. And, we're in kind of the insider view, and we're fighting all the time to keep funding to do that kind of monitoring on a regular basis. And I'm shocked at the cost estimates I'm looking at to start monitoring seagrass restoration in the Indian River Lagoon. The monitoring is going to cost more than the actual seagrass restoration project itself if you extend out 3 to 5 years. And it's really high risk. So I think some things that we take for granted that we've already recommended before, some of those we just need to keep every year saying, monitoring is important, understanding the research gaps and applying funding to those gaps is important, because those folks who make decisions about where funding goes and how it goes, are changing with, a lot of election cycles. And we just can't, I think, assume that everybody gets that.
Good point. Any final thoughts on this? Start going forward. Okay. Well, we'll try to get something started. And maybe, like Kate suggested, we could start with like one area and scope it out and see what it would be like. And Megan can share it with you all for feedback. We can do some stuff just in terms of feedback on that through email. We don't meet again until November, end of November, after Thanksgiving, I believe. November 29th. And that's going to be an in-person meeting in Tallahassee. And it's going to be focused on health stuff. So a lot of the things we've had to kick down the road for different scheduling reasons and conflicts. So our tentative agenda for the 29th includes presentations from a number of the Department of Health funded studies. And let's see. And we'll have a more of a discussion about the HAB Health Working Group or an update on what's happened from between now and then, and how that's going to work. So that'll be useful. We also need to talk about meeting frequencies because November's coming right up and then it's going to be 2023. So I'm kind of astounded at how quickly this year is going. And with so many people, scheduling meetings as far in advance as we can has proven helpful. So I wanted your feedback on meeting frequency going forward. It's been 3 years, if you can believe it, of meeting quarterly. And we've been able to meet even more than that as needed. So I appreciate everybody's flexibility as we've worked through different projects and deadlines. But so we're thinking about 2023 and what makes sense. And I want to suggest something as a starting point for discussion. So, and I have no stake in this as I'm rotating off the task force, but we've been talking about it in terms of, what makes the most sense. I really like the all-day in-person meetings, but I think maybe limiting those to twice a year and having a couple on the in-betweens of the shorter meetings like today where we run through updates and have, discussions on ongoing work plans and goals. And as things are going to come up that we get roped into or we want to help with, we can have meetings as needed. But what do folks think about that? So maybe 2 longer, still meeting quarterly, but 2 longer and 2 shorter meetings.
Works for me.
I think it's fine.
I'm fine with that.
Everybody's been very flexible and accommodating, so I think if something changes that and we realize, we're going to need to meet more frequently to accomplish something, then we can do that. But that'll sort of be how we sketch out the next year.
I mean, a lot of the work's being done by the smaller work groups anyway, so as long as this group is kept abreast of what the work groups are doing and the work groups get the input from the larger group, I think that works fine.
Right. So do you all feel like you're getting the feedback from the work groups and the ongoing, the stuff that happens behind the scenes? As always, Megan's got her finger on the pulse of everything that's happening. So if there are specific questions you have, feel free to reach out to her and ask what's going on. The question or what came up today about I think, Quay, you said it, that they don't know what, like, we're doing as a task force. Are there any suggestions for improving our visibility or communications?
I don't know, because I was kind of shocked when it was mentioned to me as an offhand comment by our IWG Habarka coordinator, who said that some person they were talking to in DEP said that they didn't know what the Florida HAB Task Force was doing, and that's why they had jumped in and requested doing this webinar that they're doing, and which is being given by Mark Rain. So hopefully it will be fairly broad. But that's all I know. And, you know, this may have to do with internal politics that I know nothing about.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we do have a webpage. We can take another look at it. We do put out a lot of information on things that have happened since the task force was reestablished. So I feel like...
But, you know, we've talked about a joint meeting with the Blue-Green Algal Task Force, but it's been logistically, I think, from comments you've made, a nightmare. I don't know if that would solve the problem, because I'm not sure that's who the complaint's coming from.
I chatted with Mark about that within the last few months, and it's still something that we're trying to work towards. So it's, you know, we're just trying to figure it out and deal with logistics.
Yeah. It has to be for the right reason.
I had kind of a follow-up question that some people here might know, or we might have to go outside the group, but a few years ago there had been a proposition to have a Florida HAB symposium, and it seems like that might be something really good to help out with some of these initiatives, especially moving into a focus beyond Kyrenia. And I just wonder if that has been discussed at all recently. I think there are a few steering committee members for that. Is that something that we could see if there's still plans to have that?
Yeah, I can ding the group that was discussing it. It was going to be, Sherry, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I think it was going to be Sea Grant hosted. But yeah, it was a small group of Florida scientists who were discussing it back. We might have started having those conversations like 6 months before COVID, and then, you know, it all went on hold. So we can revisit.
Well, I think that would be sort of an outcome of Florida Observing Workshop, too. I got the impression that might help.
Yeah, it could certainly tie in a bunch of efforts. Yeah, I think there's so much happening in terms of, you know, the monitoring, all the different research projects, all the initiatives at this level. It's hard to see the big picture and how everything plugs in together. And I think we need to work on kind of conveying that in those two different ways, because it is all.
I've got a thought. If in fact there's still a lot of interest in a Florida, HAB symposium, that might be the vehicle, to push information into that white paper, and do it almost as a proceedings. If you get, the players, the right players at the table, it might be a kind of a two-step where you convene a statewide symposium and then, drive the bigger story about HABs other than Kyrenia, into the white paper, and almost use it as a combined white paper and proceedings.
Well, proceedings from something like that, yeah. I think proceedings from something like that would be valuable, and maybe not something we would think initially to do. I think organizing a symposium will probably take longer than we'd like to kind of start to, and it might be at a more scientific level than we need, but I do think we could get a nice product out of that too. So, I mean, I guess I can ask about that symposium, but if it's still kind of a dormant topic, we can try to do it ourselves. I think it would be worthwhile.
What about instead of doing it, do it as a series of monthly webinars or something like that? That's sort of low effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Food for thought. No, I kind of like that idea too, but there's something about a symposium from the side of a researcher or a manager who attends, just getting all this information, being around all the people and the discussions that happen and the ideas that are generated and the motivation that people take out of those. So, I mean, I think the monthly webinars may be a separate but also good idea that we could think about for, and who to gear them towards. Are these public, facing, or are they? We have way more to discuss than we had time booked for today. So I'm grateful for the generation of some good ideas, and we'll continue to work on what we talked about today. Any last questions or pressing comments people want to make before we break? I don't think that there are any individual action items for folks. Megan, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that covers it.
Go ahead. All right. Okay. So, again, this was just a chance for us to touch base, talk about the plans, update y'all on stuff. I'm glad we had the time to get together. November will be here before you know it. We'll continue to flesh out that agenda and share it with you at some point when it's close to ready. Hopefully everybody will be able to make it in person in November. And if there are no other remarks or questions, I will close the meeting. And thank you all for joining us. So, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Well, take care.